The paranormal is real. Listen.
On this episode of Curious Explorers, Kathy and I take on the weighty topic of demonic possession, psychic phenomena, and mental illness. We'll talk about how these three things may coexist, and we'll go over a case of demonic possession reported in Malachi Martin's well-known book, Hostage to the Devil. So just some fair warning. Again, we're talking about the specifics of the case of demonic possession and symptoms of mental illness. This may be distressing to some listeners. So this is just a heads up in case this might be a little bit much for you. But if you're curious, stay tuned.
Hey, Trace, what's up?
I've got an interesting episode for you and hopefully for our listeners and viewers.
I am excited.
When left to my own devices, who knows where my mind will go?
I have a pretty good idea, but I'm excited to see what you've come up with.
Yeah, and I hope nothing spooky happens after as a result of the topic, but we'll see. And then we'll just have to record that. And I hope it does. Right? That's why we're so different. We're so good together. So if I had to give this episode a formal title, it would be something like Demonic Possession, Psychic Phenomena, and Mental Illness. And I want to just let you know, and the other, anyone else kind of joining us virtually, that I don't think I'm going to come to a huge conclusion. And I want to hear what people think, and I want to hear what you think.
That's a big subject.
So demonic possession, psychic phenomena, and mental illness, because I think a lot of times we think that they're separate things, or that if it's one, it's not the other. Mm-hmm. And I want to just say that I don't think I'm an expert. I had maybe one patient over the years that I thought, could this be a little of both, a little of all three? And if we have time, we'll get into that. If not, we'll save it for another episode. But basically, I was looking through some of the many eerie books I have on my bookshelf. Many of them I've gotten from your bookstore, Paranormal Books
by
and
my
Curiosities
recommendation,
in Asbury Park, New Jersey. But as I was looking through them, I just randomly picked one. And I had several questions. I'm just going to kind of lay them out at the beginning, and then I'm going to summarize the story. So one question is, when we hear about a case of demonic possession, is that what it is? And what does that actually mean? And how do we know? I don't know if we're going to answer that today. Another one is, if we're thinking psychologically, because this is what I think most mental health professionals would say, is this a split off part of the self that we find consciously unacceptable? Right? So what happens is it comes out almost as if it's something separate from us and bad or evil, right? It's some part of this ourselves that we can't incorporate, we can't sit with because it feels too bad for one reason or another. That could be a whole other episode. Are these kind of phenomena that people report signs of some sort of physical illness or mental illness that's, not just, I don't want to say just, but could it be the result of trauma? Could it be the result of a diseased brain? Both. So just a quick overview, there are psychiatrists who have written about entity possession. They themselves are not without controversy, so I'm not going to use them as the defining word, but one is Samuel Sagan, who wrote, has all these case reports in his book, Entity Possession, if anybody wants to look these up. Another one is M. Scott Peck, who wrote People of the Lie and Glimpses of the Devil. He also wrote The Road Less Traveled, and he talks about human and non-human manifestations of evil for a variety of reasons. I don't know if I would say it would be the last word for me on what these phenomena are. Whole other topic. And I was looking into, all right, what does possession mean before we even get into the case? And the case is from a book by Malachi Martin. Malachi or Malachi?
With an I. He pronounced it Malachi.
Malachi, okay.
Yep.
Father Malachi Martin. So I actually went online and I found that the Diocese of Paterson in New Jersey, I didn't even think they would have anything on this, but they talked about demonic infraction, which is the presence of evil in a location or object, which might have been cursed, commended to the devil or an evil spirit. And it says that any priest can recite a prayer to remove the invading spirit. So we'll talk a little bit about what one might do. The next level down is demonic infestation. And you've been called about all these things. So for our listeners, though, who may not be as well versed as you, demonic infestation looks like physical attacks on the body of the person, as demonstrated by cuts, burns, bites, swelling, or fractures, and so forth. And demonic obsession would be the next one, the next more serious thing. And that's mental attacks, which affect a person's senses or produce thoughts in them of suicide or homicide. Evil spirits cannot read our thoughts or inhabit our souls, but they can deduce our thoughts by offering us temptations. That's according to that website. I don't even know if I would say that would, from what I've read, that they're limited in that way. But again, I'm no expert. And then the last one, the most serious, would be demonic possession, taking control of the body, including legs, arms, and mouth. The person's body might contort, the back could arch, the eyes might roll back, and the voice could get deeper, the jaw might drop down and move to one side. The demons also might give the person superhuman strength, the power to levitate, the ability to speak and understand languages that they did not know previously, and knowing information that they didn't know before. And that's, I guess, summarized by Father Lambert. So that brings me to our case. Again, Father Malachi Martin, the book, good Lord, I'll get to the title in a minute. I wrote it down, and for some reason I'm having a senior moment. Hostage to the Devil. So Malachi Martin, Hostage to the Devil, originally published in 1976, and talks about a very literal belief in the devil and possession. This is not, metaphorical in the way he's talking about. The book's been revised since then, but basically I picked a case, and I forget the first part of the title in the book, but the second part is "And the Smiler." Right. And right there, just weird smiling is super creepy. You may, it just would be anyway. It doesn't even need to be demonic, but I digress. So Marianne and the Smiler, that's what I'm calling this chapter, and it's easy to find. It's a case that took place in 1965, and it details the third and final exorcism performed by one Father Peter, who's a priest from Ireland who never sought out to do this, but the church has called him up to do this exorcism. He's done two before, and he's assisted or observed others, but it doesn't seem to be his main gig throughout his career.
Right.
Now, Marianne is the subject in question. I think at the time of the exorcism, she's probably somewhere in her early to mid-20s, so not old. And as I go over the details of this case, I might interject a little bit about where there could be confusion about, is this mental illness? Is this telepathy or some other psychic phenomenon at work in conjunction with mental illness, in conjunction with physical illness, in conjunction with demonic or some other possession? So Marianne was, by the reports in the book, always a little bit different. She had a twin brother she was close to. Family's very Catholic, very religious. Sounds like a nice family from all, outward appearances. She seems close to them and her brother, but she's always been described as a bit different. Maybe not a super social kid. It said she didn't start speaking much until age 6. So as a psychologist, I'd be thinking about what else could that mean? The family's very devout. In high school and college, it sounds like her behavior becomes more and more abnormal. I'm going to say erratic, oppositional, and starts making less sense to anybody around her. And she starts withdrawing. So even in high school, it's clear that she's very different. She's not well socialized. She's argumentative in a way that she can't let it go when she's arguing with her teachers about various points in school. But her points don't quite make sense. And you can... So
it's more than like teenage,
Correct.
I mean, we all become a little bit more difficult from the age of 13 to... Well, in my case, 50, but, you know what I mean? Like you, there's that angst that comes in, but it sounds like what you're talking about is more than that or different than that.
I would say so. And again, I'm just getting the snippets of
from the book, right?
In the book. But if somebody were presenting a case like on an inpatient psych unit, which is where there would be a more detailed case like this presented and where I've had to present, these early experiences and how she would describe herself and how other people would describe her would be important in forming like a bigger picture.
Right.
So one thing I was struck by, and I could go back to the actual excerpts later maybe, but when she's arguing, she's coming up with these statements that almost sound like you could almost find a thread of them making sense, but they don't quite. So it's like arguing with a teacher. I'm paraphrasing greatly, but everything is evil and yet everything is good. And they're both the same thing. And you can't have one without the other, but they're both one. And I could see somebody who's very philosophically minded finding some whisper of a thread. But she easily gets kind of off on these tangents that make less and less sense. So, and again, she's very oppositional to the point where she's unable to kind of calm herself down, and she is unable to relate to teachers and other kids. It's becoming a real problem in school. She, I believe, graduates high school, starts out at a religious college. That doesn't go well. She's constantly fighting with one nun who's teaching her in particular, and really derails the class again and again. And she winds up leaving that school, transferring to another college, and graduating. But again, I think the problems seem to follow her. She's smart enough to be admitted to a graduate program in physics at NYU. Not an easy task.
That's impressive. Yeah.
So she's bright, and she can clearly pull herself together enough to do well enough in school.
Right.
And take a graduate
because that would
entrance
require
exam.
an enormous amount of focus.
Right.
So if she was having disjointed thoughts, she must be able to put those on the shelf and focus at least, on the subject at hand, because that's an impressive and difficult subject to kind of master.
Right. And if you can't accept anything you hear or any sort of theorems or any sort of, established scientific facts and kind of repeat them back and apply them, I don't see how you would gain admission to a program like that. But she enrolls, but then she drops out before finishing. I'm going to describe this a little bit as a psychologist, and I hope I don't offend anyone with my description. I'm just going to describe it as summarizing it as I read it in the book and how I would describe it if I had to tell another clinician. So she lives alone. That's not a problem, but she stops performing what we would call ADLs, or activities of daily living, like basic grooming, basically washing herself. And so her smell is described as rancid and trailing, so that if you were anywhere in the vicinity where she had just been, you know this rancid, gagging smell.
You would know she had been there.
You would know she had been there because it was so bad. And there was some estimate that she hadn't bathed in a few years.
Wow.
Which is significant right there. She was described, I'm going to summarize it, as exhibiting hypersexual behavior. And I don't just mean having encounters with people that are just for that day or that hour. I mean like numerous revolving door partners. But again, I want to consider the context and that a priest is writing this book. But from the description, it seems like they're frightening and weird and creepy.
Well, I mean, if she's trailing an odor, you know what I mean? And her hygiene is what we're talking about it being. You can't imagine that there's a whole lot of romance going on to that kind of, sexual behavior. It sounds like something that's more like, well, I don't know, animalistic, or,
That's a perfect word to describe it.
Yeah.
Because again, who is going to be a willing participant in that?
Right.
Because your odor is so bad, you're so foul,
right,
or so befouled. But the people she's having these momentary encounters with, actually, she's described as being unable. I'm going to be delicate here, unable to complete the act again and again, because she is engaging in kind of animalistic behaviors. She has this near constant creepy smile that does not go beyond her mouth. And she says things that frighten them. And she's aware that she's frightening.
Okay.
And there seems to be kind of a pretty violent, aggressive flavor, again, as described in the book. So her mother is clearly worried because she's isolated herself. Her behavior's erratic. She's got all these issues. So this is in New York City. I think she might be living in the East Village, which for people who are not familiar with the city, it's like way downtown and east.
Mhm.
Her parents live way uptown, and a little west. And so it's not that they can't get to her, but she doesn't want to see them.
Right.
So her worried mother sends her, and she's probably early 20s now. So again,
Mhm.
not, you would
That was going
worry
to be
about your kid.
That was going to be my question,
Right.
because I mean, there are certain psychological things
100%.
or illnesses that manifest at different ages and things like that. Although, based on what you're talking about, she seems to have started other things. This seems to have been something that had been growing for, at this point, quite some time.
Right. I don't think we would ever describe her as, I'm going to say, typical or normal in the broad range of normal.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because for people who don't know, there are certain psychotic illnesses or illnesses marked by psychotic beliefs and bizarre behaviors like schizophrenia. That's not the
Mm-hmm.
only one that you might see in somebody's late teen or early 20s. It's
Right.
commonly when you would see that. So her mother is worried, understandably, and sends her a box, a care package of fruit and sandwiches to her apartment. But she only does this once. And the reason why she only does it once and doesn't send anything again is because the box is returned to her apartment, shipped back, and it is reeking and dripping with a mix of excrement and urine.
Mm-hmm.
So she has urinated and defecated all over the sandwiches and fruit and sent it back. Again, not the behavior of a normal person who had previously a close relationship to her family. I hope we should definitely put it just like some sort of warning before this episode, because it is disturbing. Yeah. She reports also in interviews, and I don't know if these are interviews, she has gone to see at least one or I think two psychiatrists by this point who really don't seem to know what to do with her. They're recommending things that, like, get out in the fresh air, and they've done things like hypnosis with her, which I actually wouldn't. And
but it is like 1965 at this point, right? I mean, we're talking about
it's like probably the earlier 1960s.
Right. So we're talking about quite a while ago, 60 years ago.
Not the most evolved era in psychiatry, and to be honest, I think they didn't know what to do with her.
Right.
One says she's kind of fine. She's clearly not.
Yeah, a box of urine and feces is not an appropriate thank you card for a care package.
I don't know why she wasn't involuntarily hospitalized, because
I was going to ask you, did she go to the doctors voluntarily, or was this something that she was pushed into? So I mean, I actually find that very interesting, because it implies that there is a part of her that is aware that something that she might feel is internal or external to herself, like she's clearly saying, listen, something's wrong here.
I'm gonna summarize this and paraphrase this by saying what she describes and what's reported about her descriptions are that she almost sounds like she feels both empty and full. And by empty, I mean, all of those emotions of, distress and loneliness and dissatisfaction and not knowing why she feels so bad, but not able to snap out of it, but also full, like, lots of thoughts, kind of distressing, but also, I would say, disturbed.
Right.
So she reports seeing what she refers to as the man, in quotes, during this time. And she's spotted by people in the neighborhood, not only smelling horrible and wandering and just, behaving oddly, but there's a small community park nearby that she goes into. And by the way, I know the park that they were talking about in the book, and for some reason, I think it's Gramercy Park, might have been a different, but it's one of the small parks around there where all the neighbors look onto the park and know who comes and goes and knows if you live there or don't.
Right.
So it attracts some attention. Sometimes she sits motionless for hours and then abruptly leaves. And in one case, apparently somebody came into the park with a boombox and is blasting music. And as this person gets near her, she collapses to the ground and has spasms, and she's writhing. And somebody called the police. The policeman supposedly comes, and he witnesses a tall man that he assumes is a relative, because she calmly goes with him. He re-alerts her just by touching her, and she calmly gets up and goes with him, and he has a similar creepy smile. So he assumes they're related. And no report
So wait,
was
so the
filed.
police, you actually have a policeman seeing this person.
Correct. And,
Well,
and
that's
supposedly, I don't know who gave this testimony, because supposedly the man says to the cop, "Oh, I'm the only one in the world for her, who's here for her, and you don't even have to file a report." And supposedly he didn't. So I don't even know how all this data was gathered. That's a whole other issue. Also during this time, she begins reacting violently to religious objects, the name of Jesus, etc., to the point that a young schoolgirl who's walking in the neighborhood and kind of shakes a church donation box kind of too near her, like near her face or whatever, looking for a donation. And the box has a cross and the name of Jesus on it. This causes her, Marianne, to growl and shake and spit and start kicking the little girl violently in the shins. So I don't know how she's not arrested at this point. I'm not sure if it's just New York City in the early 60s.
Yeah, laziness or,
I don't know.
They didn't arrest drunk drivers either. So, like it definitely was a different time with different, perspectives on whether or not someone should be incarcerated or taken in or something.
And I think there was a whole lot more crime generally in the city then. So maybe this would have been seen as like just move on.
A low priority. Yeah.
So something that this is where it hits a turning point, I think. And you'd say, like, could it get worse? So
the answer is yes, apparently.
I guess if it's
yes,
demonic
it can't get worse.
Maybe this is why they thought it was demonic. So neighbors in her building noticed that there are weird sounds, like huge loud banging that goes on for like 4 or 5 hours at a time. She doesn't leave her apartment. There's a horrendous smell now that people can smell outside the apartment. So the neighbors call the police. The police force the door open, and they find her in what they describe reportedly as a comatose state on her bed, just eyes kind of staring up at the ceiling. Her room reeks, and the room is freezing cold despite it being extraordinarily hot outside. And I'm thinking she may not even have had air conditioning at that point.
Right.
Might have been a wall unit, but I don't think enough to make the room freezing.
Right.
But somehow as they're talking, eventually she re-alerts and is talking as if everything's fine. And I don't know if they leave or call her parents or what, but obviously everybody's concerned. There have been multiple attempts at an intervention. Her brother has not seen her now in 6 years, I think.
So, I'm glad, because that was something I was going to question, because they're twins, right?
They had been formerly very close.
Right.
But he's gotten married. He's had 2 small children. I guess the reports of her behavior have been enough to freak him out. And remember, she doesn't want to see her family either. So their attempts, have been met with the urine and feces filled box. So, sorry, I'll stop saying that. It's just
let's just say no.
It's as unnerving as the other details.
It's like nature's way of saying, "Don't send me anything anymore." Is a box of feces and urine.
Yes. The return to sender incident.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to leave it at that.
Just don't accept the package. You don't have to do that.
I'll never send a care package. So the brothers,
or like an edible arrangement. Be careful of those too.
Yeah. No, my God, don't eat it. So the brother's concerned. He hasn't seen her in 6 years. The mother warns him, Marianne's not going to be the same as she was last time you saw her. Understatement. But he said, I need to go. I need to see what's going on for myself. And he comes into the city, and the mom says, okay, but please bring a crucifix with you, and please leave it there, like surreptitiously store it there.
Sorry,
the
guys.
dogs don't even like the story.
I don't know. They just saw something, took off. Come here, Finn.
Probably
Finn,
a shadow person.
Come here. I don't know where he's going. Come on, buddy. Lincoln's well behaved. Finn is not. Sorry about that.
Sensitive. Not at all.
It's funny because as we're talking about this, I'm just realizing that blue behind me is a painting that was painted by a cultist who believed he was painting the demon out of someone. And so this painting actually is purported to be possessed by an entrapped spirit or an entrapped demon. And the method of possession or the method of exorcism of the possession was to paint her into that painting.
And most normal people would just hang that behind them.
As I'm sitting here, I'm like, I keep doing the shifty eye thing that she's doing, yeah,
Oh my
like
God.
you just look behind you and like, do I have a demon possession built? No,
hopefully
mine.
not.
You're like, no, mine is actually, I'm hanging out in the bathroom. So
yeah, no, I would be repeatedly clearing my place out, not inviting stuff in. But we have so much.
Yeah, we're very
for all
different in
these
certain ways.
Episodes. Seriously. So anyway, Mom asks him to kind of secretly leave a crucifix in her apartment. I don't know how he thinks he's going to do this, but he says, okay. He goes there. And what he describes is that Marianne seems somewhat familiar, some similar facial expressions, some similar mannerisms, but it also seems like she's somewhere else a lot of the time. So she's talking to him, but he describes it as if she's talking for someone else who's listening.
Okay.
Not him, which is creepy, but I can imagine, it's hard to describe, but I can imagine what he means. Like almost as if you like, I imagine when people are asked by like law enforcement to go secretly tape the mob boss or something, like you're asking questions, but it's like you're asking for the person listening to the recording, not really for the person who's sitting across from you.
They're not coming from you. They're coming from somebody else. That's interesting.
Or like there's another something present. And I think he kind of suggests that he feels like there could be at times. So he notices periods during this meeting with his sister that he feels very afraid. And again, I don't think this was like a waif of a man either. I didn't get that impression. And then other times where he feels fine, almost as if like there are times when she's not like herself and there's something chilling about her or what's coming from her. So he's observing this. She gets up to go to the bathroom at one point, and he takes the crucifix quickly out of his bag and shoves it under her mattress. She comes out of the bathroom. Everything seems kind of fine. Remember, like also, this is like a room. It's probably like, it sounds like it's a studio apartment where there's pretty much a bed and a dresser and not a lot else. So there's not, I think he's sitting in a chair and she's sitting on her bed during this time. She sits on the bed and all of a sudden she starts, I think, like foaming and growling and writhing and freaking out. So whatever happens, fast forward, the family brings her to their house and tries to address this themselves. And it's a disaster, and all these different misfortunes start befalling the parents. So stopping there for a second, I think that she meets criteria for a number of serious mental health issues from early on. Like even in childhood, I would have been concerned. And I would leave it at that, even with the freaking out over the crucifix or Jesus, because if she feels she's evil, that would make sense to me. However, fast forward and Father Peter is called in to do this exorcism. So it's him, there's a younger priest, there's an uncle, I think, a police officer who's a family friend, and her father. And they're there to try and restrain her. And during the exorcism, there are other things that happen that seem to be supernatural to me. They actually seem to be maybe beyond psychic. They could be. Certainly they're telekinetic and maybe telepathic, but it seems like something more. So the drawers start opening and closing on the dresser. It's one of the few pieces of furniture in the room. She's saying all kinds of stuff that is clearly disturbing. She starts insulting and taunting Father Peter by speaking Hebrew, which he actually speaks fluently. He learned that in the seminary. Not something most people speak. And he's an Irish priest. Not a lot of Irish people speak fluent Hebrew, I imagine. Not to stereotype, but you never know. I don't think so. And also she is speaking Latin and he understands her clearly. And it makes sense and it's clever and it's nuanced. And the thing that's really creepy is he has something he's never told anyone. So his one and only sexual encounter was when he was 16 years old in Ireland with a woman named May. And May says very specific things to him, also kind of taunting him a little bit that he is going into the priesthood. Like, she calls him Peter Eater, or Peter the Eater, I guess referring to their sexual act, and says some other things that wouldn't be typical to say.
Right.
And she says, I'll never tell anyone, and actually this is in 1922 when this takes place. And in 1929, she dies from a burst appendix, as people were more likely to then. So now in 1964, this woman, or 1965, Marianne is on the bed calling him Peter the Eater, and saying all these things that only May had ever said to him and knew. And this sounds super creepy. And one of the things, the demonic voice is referring to themselves, like as multiple beings in there as the kingdom. And they're saying, like, basically, this is going to be, like, basically suggesting this is it. And at his second exorcism, like years and years before, they said, the third one will be the last one. Basically, that's it. And in fact, the next year after this exorcism is done, the third year, the year after the third exorcism, which is Marianne's, he has a cardiac event and dies. So, and then a lot of the story about what he validated is from another priest who had spoken with him after the exorcism. Anyway, very long story. It's the last parts that make me think, all right, maybe there is something else telling her these things. And I think she's mentally ill. And I think there could be a psychokinetic thing that maybe I don't know if it's just from her. I don't know if it's from demons. But the speaking Hebrew and the speaking Latin when you don't even know you're going to have an exorcism. And she's been so isolated.
Right.
And she's not speaking some other language that it would be obvious he would speak.
To me, what I find, and again, trusting and accepting the source, right? So that's something that we have to, that's the caveat here, which is like trusting and accepting that what Malachi Martin has written is accurate and honest.
And not embellished.
Right. The thing that I find compelling, and I realize, like, this sounds crazy, but like, I look at it and say, well, he knew what he was called, right? He knew that she called him Peter the Eater. He knew Hebrew. He knew what had been said. And because I've actually had lots of experiences where I'm like, that's mind reading. And I realize that mind reading isn't something that we do or that we accept happens. But in my experience, it 100% does happen. But what I think is the most compelling thing that you said was when she went to the bathroom and the crucifix was put under her bed without her knowledge, and she reacted to it. Because that, to me, had she been aware that it was there and had a reaction to it, I would argue, well, she was raised devoutly Catholic, and that would be something that someone who was, I'm not claiming pretending to be possessed, but someone who had kind of bought into the idea that there was something evil in her would have reacted to. But the idea that she was reacting to something that she didn't know consciously was present, that I find very compelling. The other stuff I find compelling too, but that was the first thing that you said that kind of clicked for me and said, okay, we seem to be moving into something that, yes, there could be mental illness. And of course, having, an attack of demonic, having demonic infestation and kind of dealing with that for years would, I think, naturally lead someone to have emotional and mental illnesses, because you just can't stay strong for that long. But that's the one thing that when you said that made me kind of sit up and listen more closely, because it's something external. It's something she wasn't aware of consciously that she physically reacted to. And that I find really interesting.
No, 100%. And the thing I want to say about telepathy, because there has been research on telepathy, and again, it's one of these things that tends to happen more, like all psychic phenomena, I think, out in the world spontaneously. And not necessarily as easily in a laboratory setting, like, all right, go.
Right.
However, the thing with telepathy, the thing with me saying it's, and I don't say like it's just telepathy, that in and of itself is pretty incredible.
Right.
But remember, these are memories from, it might have been memories from 50 years ago for him.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, or 40 something years ago. And we have zillions. I don't know what the exact number would be. I couldn't even estimate it. But innumerable memories, all of us, including innumerable significant ones from early in our life that we aren't consciously thinking about.
Right.
And I think the thing with telepathy is it's almost like, well, if it's the person thinking about it, that's one thing to maybe pick up on it. But if it's buried in their own subconscious at this point, you know what I mean?
Right.
So that's just, I'm curious about what listeners and viewers think. I don't know. Is this demonic possession? Is this mental illness? Is
in the book, did they treat it? I mean, they obviously they gave her an exorcism, which is not an easy thing to do. You know, I mean, when we think of exorcisms, we almost exclusively think of the Roman Rite. You know, there are other other faiths, other religions, other practices that absolutely perform exorcisms, but they're not the ones we think of when we're thinking of and in truth, even those other rites have a tendency to think of the Roman Rite as the most stringent of rites. You know, you can get an exorcism from Lutheran. You can get an exorcism from evangelical. I mean, there's entire religions called deliverance ministries that are, you know, exorcism is something that they do on a weekly basis. But to get a Roman Catholic exorcism approved is not a foregone conclusion. I mean,
no.
Especially in the 1960s when
and in the United States, it's not like in Italy where it's a lot more accepted.
On the East Coast of the United States, where you did have this big movement, you had this Jesuit movement that had come in, where you had. And I think he probably talks about this in that book, where, you know, Jesuits were trained, most of them were trained psychologists. Like they believed wholeheartedly in you know, in psychology and in treating mental illness, and you had to be evaluated by a medical doctor, by a psychologist, so the idea is that they got, and it's unheard of for them to give you an exorcism because, hey, it might work. They take it very, very seriously. So, I mean, you might get a blessing or you might get a deliverance or something like that because they think, well, let's try it. But you're not getting an exorcism from the Roman Catholic Church unless you meet some very, very stringent criterion. So the idea that she did get a Roman Rite exorcism, to me, means there was an extreme amount of evidence that there was something that was not exclusively considered to be mental or emotional illness. And remember, a lot of the priests were trained psychologists. So,
yes.
You know, I mean, I find that I will say, I find that when you talk about a Roman Rite exorcism, to me, it's kind of like, I bet there was a demon in there. You know, like, even if
I'm laughing because I'm glad it's not me.
Yeah, but like I don't tend to lean demon. You know, I tend to lean something else. But I feel like if the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church and I don't see eye to eye on a whole lot of things, but if the Catholic Church, particularly after 1960, was willing to perform an exorcism, they do not do exorcisms with great willingness. You know, that you really have to hit a certain bar. I find that to be, you know, very convincing evidence that there was something other than just mental illness going on there.
And I just, for people who aren't familiar with what Kathy's saying with the Roman ritual, this was something established in 1614 and updated as per the Second Vatican Council,
Yeah.
or somewhere between 1962 and 1965.
Yeah,
But
Vatican
you're right.
II.
Yes. But it would not have, you're 100% spot on. Nobody would have been rushing to say something is demonic possession. And in fact, some of the reported frustrations, as you know, of people who are saying, I think, so-and-so that I know is possessed and we need an exorcism, is that it takes so long and they have to jump through so many hoops. And in the US, a lot of requests are denied.
I would say 99%. Yeah, I mean, it's so, I mean, I've been involved with 2 exorcisms. One was performed by a former Catholic priest who actually left because it was too difficult to get approval. In his mind, it was too difficult for him to get approval to perform exorcisms. He was also a psychologist, so he's practicing. And the other one was absolutely more of a deliverance, more of a kind of a lay exorcism. I will say the former Catholic priest used the Roman Rite. He also he almost gave therapy to the demon. It was almost a way of, it was very, very interesting. But I mean, he said that he left the priesthood because he felt his calling was to help people who were suffering from these types of possessions and oppressions. And he felt that the church was too stringent. And his argument was that they were unlikely because of the PR of it. That they didn't want to be perceived as falling too hard on the side of the invisible world. And it was interesting because he was like, there are people out there that need help and they're not getting the help because it's too difficult. That by the time these things are proven to the degree that the Catholic Church requires it, sometimes people are beyond our ability to help them. And I don't fall on either side of that. I just thought it was an interesting perspective.
No, absolutely it is. And again, I'm curious, what do people think? Are people familiar with what we're talking about? Do people have questions? Does this sound more like a case of, even just somebody who might be seeking attention? I don't think that's what it sounds like. And also maybe pretty psychic. And again, I'm revealing my hand. I think the most psychic person in the world isn't going to become fluent in 2 new languages on the spot. And I've seen some pretty good psychics, and I don't know anybody who can do that.
Right. And I think that it's an interesting case because you wonder too if something demonic isn't choosing someone and literally masquerading as mental illness. In other words, like I'm going to do this and I'm going to make you think that this person is mentally ill. And I mean, just think of the horror of being that person. Was the exorcism successful?
So I don't think I got to that part.
Sorry.
I think I was so stuck on all these other details.
Because they're not always successful.
The priest died.
Yeah, they're not always successful. I mean, that's what we have this tendency to believe that, and they don't. Oh, it's not like one night. Like sometimes exorcisms take months,
right,
for it to happen. And I think sometimes it's hand in hand with mental and physical illness as well. So you kind of have to extricate it, and that's why exorcists, generally speaking, are the most educated people. The most educated priests, and they do they rise. It's funny that you said that this wasn't something that he wanted to do. It's kind of like a sport. It's kind of like sports where someone out there is just like, nope, that guy has it, and we're gonna pull it in and see. I mean, and listen, like I said, I don't think the Catholic Church is right about everything. Certainly not about everything, because I'm sure there's some women out there that could probably perform exorcisms as well. But there are times too in and I think Malachi Martin kind of talks about this, where they're partially successful, where they're able to alleviate certain certain manifestations, certain symptoms, but not actually able to eliminate the, the demonic personality. And when you're talking about possession, that's what you're talking about. It is a demon. It is not a human spirit that is causing trouble, and that's terrifying.
Which would be bad enough.
Yeah, which would suck enough.
I'm not laughing because it's funny. Again, it's
terrifying. It's terrifying.
Discharging the distress over this awful. I mean, just
and
the thought.
And I'm laughing because I'm like, I have this thing behind me, and now I'm looking at it with a completely different. I actually also have an artifact here, and maybe at some point when you come down here, we can actually take it out and look at it. But it is a young woman who was convicted of killing her father because she was diagnosed. He actually diagnosed her as schizophrenic. He was a medical doctor. Don't know if he was qualified to diagnose her as that, though. He was a general practitioner, but
not qualified.
She ended up killing him because the voices and what she believed were demons told her to do it. Her brother, I have her baby shoes and a couple of the artifacts from the house, including her ID.
I'm sorry. How did you get any of this?
They were donated to. They were donated. It is a horrific story, but the house that she was in and killed her father. After her father died, she was convicted but never went to prison. She went into an institution where she ultimately ended up dying. Only a couple of years in, but her brother, who was also a medical doctor, stopped practicing medicine and became a dentist because he felt uncomfortable given what his father had done, which was treat her in a way that was insufficient. But also, he never stepped foot in the house again, and he paid the taxes on it. He paid the taxes on it. He had the lawn taken care of, and no one was ever allowed in the house again. He died about 6 years ago, and the house went up for auction. He had paid the taxes on it because he never wanted another family to be able to live in it, because he came to believe that there was something to the house. The police officers in the neighborhood also believe it to be that. There we go. That's weird.
That is weird.
There we go.
Just for anyone listening on audio only.
I just had all these lights just kind of flicker and go out.
It says, I guess, got a weird dialogue box. It says, Riverside is having trouble getting a signal from your camera. Check the camera is on, and I see you and I see me.
It's very strange, right? Because I don't see you anymore, but
oh my God,
it is weird. And it's weird that happens to us whenever I'm in this room. And
can I just say what happened though? Your lights flickered multiple times as we're talking about this.
And then
that
went
was
off.
The creepest that I've actually
And it was as I was talking about it, right?
Yes.
It was as I was talking about the house, because he literally owned the house, and after his father died and his sister gets convicted, his mother moves out. She ends up dying as well. I think probably of a broken heart, but
there's no good ending to the story.
No, it's a terrible story. And the story, the deeper part of the story is that the daughter believed that her father had been overtaken by something, and that who she was seeing was in fact not her father, and ended up stabbing him, I think like 17 times on the sidewalk out front. She ends up being convicted, but not being sent to prison. She's sent to an institution where she dies just a few years later. The brother comes to believe that there's something in the house, or at least that's what the neighbors believe. Comes to believe that there's something in the house, never sells the house, pays the taxes on the house, keeps the upkeep of the landscaping of the house for 40 years. He ends up dying just a few years ago, and finally the house goes up for auction. And it was the haunted house in the neighborhood, and it has been renovated. There's 4 units in there now, and people moved in this summer. So I'm curious to see. I mean, it's a beautiful house, but I am very curious. Officers, local police, absolutely refused to go in there, and they said they never had reason to, because the neighbors were so afraid of the house that they never had cause. But people would claim to see the young woman, who again has been dead for 35 years, standing in the window and looking out. So the whole neighborhood kind of believed that the house was, if not possessed, it was haunted. I have several private items. And the way I got them was when they finally auctioned off the house, they let people in to buy what was in the house. And there was nothing everything in the house, all of the furniture, everything was in the house, and had about a 2-inch, 2 inches of dust because nobody had been in the house. And somebody went in and picked up these very personal items and said, we want these to be in the Paranormal Museum, and literally left them on my doorstep with a note saying this story needs to be told and it should be told by the Paranormal Museum.
Holy cow.
And I got her driver's license through some other very strange avenue where it was like very strange that it came to me, but I did get it.
Yeah, it's all kind of strange, Kathy. I have to be honest. You're like when you were like, well, this part was strange. Like, no, the whole thing is really
that
weird.
was the weird thing, was how I got the driver's license. But
I want to
it's
tell you before when you were talking, and this went on for like 5 minutes. So I can see you and I can see Blue, the portrait behind you, the demonically painted portrait, or the demon trapped in the painting.
Right.
I'll leave that there. But there was about 5 minutes where your camera and Blue were so scrambled looking. And I don't know if it'll show up when we look at the recording after.
Right.
But so fuzzy and scrambled. But I could see like her face would emerge a little bit in parts, like at the eyes or the mouth. And then it would all be scrambled. But 5 minutes of that. So I don't, who the heck knows if it's the paranormal activity in the Paranormal Museum or.
Someday I'm going to have to tell the story of Blue, because it in and of itself is a very creepy, weird story.
Maybe that'll be our next episode. You don't know.
Because somebody actually tried to break into the museum to get to her. It's one of the few times where an artifact has led to somebody literally trying to, well, I say one of the few times, the only time someone has tried to break down the door to get in to take possession of an artifact.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
To be honest, I'd be like, here you go.
I wasn't here. My poor staff
Take the
was
baby
like,
shoes and the driver's license that I have over here as well.
Take the murder weapon. It's fine. Well, this was really this was really interesting, and I do think that it could be part of a series, because I think you picked a story that is it's not a sensational. It's not one of these big sensationalized stories. It's not, it's not a conjuring case or something like that. It's not The Exorcism, which was also a great story. But I think it's a really good example of kind of this insidious, phenomena that easily masks itself as mental illness, which allows us to kind of dismiss stuff. But then when you bring in the church, and the church says, okay, all of these things considered. All of these things considered, there's something else here. Because like we said, the church they don't want to do it. It's not something that they don't jump at the opportunity for exorcism. It's a very difficult process to get the church to perform one. I think this was a really good case to bring up.
Thank you. I think for the next time we explore this, there's some transcripts of cases from Samuel Sagan's book. And again, it's not a book or a person without controversy, but again, it's another psychiatrist who's writing about, some people, I think this is the last thing I'm going to say, see demons at every turn. Right. That's not me. And I think we need to be careful about labeling everything demonic. But I think we also need to be careful about not writing off.
Right. About being dismissive of people's experiences because we don't agree with them.
Yeah, that's a perfect place.
I think Peck, to me, was the person that stepped into that. You know what I mean? Where he actually said, hey, listen, I think we're doing a disservice to people by saying there cannot be demonic possession. And we're if you're unwilling to believe, that's the same thing as blindly believing. And so while I agree that you have to take all of these things with a huge spoon of salt, you also have to be really careful about saying something isn't happening because it cannot happen, which means that there are going to be people out there that are not going to get helped.
I think it's a perfect place to end here.
Right.
But again, what do you think? We want to know. Leave us a comment. Also, please like, share, follow. It helps us to continue bringing more spooky and interesting content to you. And of course, until next time, stay curious.
And keep exploring.
Paranormal is real. Listen.
This has been another episode of Curious Explorers with Kathy Kelly and Traci Stein. If you like the episode, please, as always, remember to like, share, and follow. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you'd like to hear more of. And certainly give us a follow on social media at Curious Explorers Show. And of course, until next time, stay curious.